Hello, everyone. My name is Advita Patel, and I'm the founder of Comms Rebel. My organization helps build confident workplaces so everyone can be their best self. And we do this through inclusive internal communications and employee experience. And in today's presentation, I want to share with you on how inclusive communications can absolutely revolutionize the environment and the workplace that you work in. But before I get into it, I just want to do a few definitions for you so you understand the words I'm going to be using throughout the presentation and some of the reference points as well, so we're all on the same page. So, inclusive communication is not only the words that we use. And when I work with communication and PR professionals, we often focus a lot of energy on the words, which are important, don't get me wrong. But we need to be a bit more broader than that and understand actually how can inclusive communication help build an environment where everybody can be their best selves, everyone can thrive, and everyone is included and feels a sense of belonging. So when we look at inclusive communication, it's about the practice of sharing information in ways that are respectful, accessible, considerate of everyone's background, needs, and experiences. It's about who is invited to share the messages, who gets consulted and involved, and whose understanding of voices are we missing in terms of representation. Before I get into the stop, start, and steal element of the presentation, I want to demystify a few words for you. Because when I talk to professionals, communication professionals, and also other leaders in organizations, they often get confused about some of the words we use when it comes to inclusive practices. And this framing that I've got here in front of you today is based on original sources from Werner Myers and Daniel Judai, who came up with this collectively a few years ago. So diversity is all about being on the guest list. Equality is making sure everyone is invited. Equity, and this is where people can get a bit confused, equity is making sure you have the right access to the party through whatever transport you want to arrive in. Inclusion is being asked to choose the music, and belonging is being a member of the planning committee. Hopefully that helps you define the differences between some of the words we use. Like I said, equality and equity are the two words or definitions that people can often get confused by. So equality is making sure that everybody has access to the same thing. Equity is making sure that they have a preference on how they access that information. And another example is training in the workplace. So everybody gets access to training, everybody gets access to certain resources. But some people may not be able to access that training because they may need additional support in terms of reading. They may need financial support in order to get to that training. They may need additional support from their leaders to understand that training. So you can see where equity comes in. So equity is about making sure that the person who is accessing this information has the right support around them. If you've got any questions around this, then please do let me know. But I'm hopeful that gives you a bit of an understanding of what I mean by the words I'm going to reference throughout the rest of this presentation. So what do we need to stop doing? This is something that a lot of folks do struggle with when we talk about inclusive practices and inclusive communication. We often think that we have to do everything and include everyone. But in my experience, you can't do everything for everyone because you'll end up doing nothing for no one. And the reason I say this is that when organizations try to include everyone in diversity and inclusion efforts, they sometimes can end up in a bit of a competitive ranking of who has it worst. It's treating different marginalized groups as if they're competing for the most oppressive or oppression points. And I sometimes reference it as a bit like diversity Olympics. So every time, what I mean by this is that every time one group is highlighted, sometimes one group can feel a bit sidelined. So you end up in this kind of endless cycle about hearing and then trying to figure out like what about us, what about me, and it ends up just kind of splitting resource, it ends up splitting time and budget, and nobody really benefits from it. So you end up in this kind of lots of campaigns about different awareness days, different measures of success, and it just gets very messy very quickly, and people disengage from everything, and you end up kind of not helping anybody out. So it's really important that you are quite focused on the objectives of what you're trying to achieve and the outcomes you want to achieve. And it's absolutely okay to balance and prioritize different communities and different backgrounds and different folks in terms of representation, depending on the needs of what's happening around you right now. And you look at the data set around you, you look at the research around you, look at what the studies are telling you, you invite different voices and different people into the conversation and the discussion to make sure that you are having the right priorities in place, because you can't do everything for everyone. And if you try to do that, you are going to end up just losing the path and losing your resources and splitting your time, like I said. So just be mindful of that. Just stop trying to do everything for everyone and focus on the groups and the communities and the individuals that may need that additional support more than other groups. It's not to say that they're not important, but right now, over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, the focus has to be on this group, because that's where the needs are, and that's where you have recognized that if you can help this community or this group, then they're going to see better benefits, which is going to have a ricochet effect on other communities around you. So I hope that helps you kind of understand that, because that is one of the questions I get asked frequently, is that how do I include everybody? And you just can't include everybody. You can definitely make people aware of things. You can definitely help people understand where to get information. But when you're working on campaigns and when you're working on certain services, you do have to kind of recognize the priorities of what you need to focus on. The other thing to stop doing is to kind of avoid some of these pitfalls when you are communicating with certain groups and communities. And these are some of the common pitfalls that we uncovered in our research when we were writing our book, Building a Culture of Inclusivity. One of the pitfalls is not giving people opportunity to feedback. People hate that. Like, if you're not giving people opportunity to feedback and you're just talking at them and you're just telling them what you believe they need to know, then it's going to disengage people quite quickly, and it can be quite exclusory. So you just have to be quite mindful about not excluding people from some of these conversations. You also need to be careful about inaccurate and incorrect messaging. We can often fall in the trap of misinformation and disinformation, and especially with AI generation content right now, we have to be very careful about what we are saying. Due diligence is critically important in this current modern workplace, and we need to be mindful that we're checking our sources effectively. Same with irrelevant messaging. Sometimes we can put loads of words together because we feel like we have to say something, but really take a step back and understand, is this messaging going to help? How is it adding value, and how is it helping people be their best selves? Limited representation, I see this time and time again. And it's not fair to say that your comms team should have lots of different representation. Sometimes that's not possible because of the size of your team or the area that you live in. But you need to look at, who are you communicating with, and do you have representation from your colleague population or your ERGs, your employee resources groups, or are you reaching out to folks and asking them what they think about a certain campaign, especially if it's a campaign or a community that you're not familiar with? So just look around that table, look around that virtual table, and just make sure that you've got the voices that you need to make the right choices in some of the decisions that you are putting out there. Making assumptions as well. I want to talk about that in the next slide, about biases and making sure that just because we think something is right or someone with a loud voice has told us is right, it doesn't necessarily mean it is correct. So just be mindful about how quickly we make assumptions, because we are working at pace and we don't often take the time to reflect on what these assumptions may mean to us and what it may mean to the people that we're working with. Going to the same type of people for advice, same as that limited representation. Groupthink, echo chambers, information bubbles can be quite dangerous. It can lead to catastrophic mistakes. It can lead to crisis. So just be careful about who are you going to for advice. Make sure that your learning circle, your personal board of directors, whatever you want to call it, has fair viewpoints, not only in terms of representation, in terms of characteristics also representation in terms of thinking and diversity of thought as well. One of the biggest bugbears for many people is not having time to respond to information that's being shared with them. That can make people feel that you are rushing information through, you're not giving them time to reflect, you're not allowing time for them to think about what this looks like for them. So be careful about how much time you're giving people in terms of responsive rates, and don't expect to get things turned around within a couple of hours. That's not the reality of the places we work in, sadly, even though this pace of work is often pushed upon us. And then lack of action fatigue. So people always say to me that, oh, people are tired of giving feedback, they're tired of filling in surveys. It's survey fatigue. It's never survey fatigue. People are not tired of giving feedback if they can see action taking place. If action is not happening, then they're not going to feedback. So I always look at it from an action fatigue. What are you asking of people and what are you doing about it? Because if you're consistently asking for stuff, but you're not doing anything with the information they're sharing with you, then yes, of course, people are going to get tired and they won't contribute and they won't get themselves involved in it as well. So what should you start doing? You need to start paying attention to some of the biases that we face on a daily basis. Now, I'm not going to go through every single bias on this list here because you can see this on the screen in front of you, but I am going to talk about a couple of biases that we can sometimes fall foul to when we're working at a pace and we're trying to get things over the line. One of which is that halo effect. And the halo effect was coined by a guy called Edward Thorndike in the 20s, as I've written on the screen there. And it occurs when we develop this positive impression of someone because of one of their qualities or traits, just because they seem kind or they seem generous or they seem to be asking you lots of good questions. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are right. And we can sometimes fall into that halo trap quite quickly, especially when we're using our guts. There's nothing wrong with using your gut to make a decision, by the way, but you need to balance it with your rational side and the evidence that's coming in front of you as well. The other bias I want us to also consider is authority bias. This is sometimes, again, when you're working in the public sector, when you're working with senior practitioners and doctors and nurses and leaders, we can sometimes fall foul to authority bias. Authority bias refers to a tendency where we believe in the authority figures and follow their instructions without asking questions, even if our gut at that time is telling us something isn't quite right. So you need to follow your own critical thinking. And this can be quite a nervous, worrisome thing for us to do, especially when you're talking to power. But if you haven't read the book called Rebel Ideas by Matthew Said, he talks about where authority bias has actually led to some catastrophic and disasters across the world. And it's a really good piece of writing that will help you understand why authority bias can be a bit dangerous. So again, even though it can be a bit fearful or you can be a bit worrisome speaking to power or speaking truth or speaking up to power, it's our role as professionals in the world of communications that we share all of the consequences and our insight that we have so the leader can make the right decision. Another book I highly recommend if you haven't read it is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He has written this incredible book and he refers to our brain as system 1 and system 2. And we spend a lot of our time in system 1 brain where we make those quick, unconscious decisions. Like I said, you rely on your gut feelings. And we spend a long time, majority of our time in this kind of system 1 brain, especially in the roles that we have in the workplace and the support that we're giving from a communications perspective. We're working at pace. We're often working with limited resources, limited budget. So we're having to work quick and think quick and make decisions quickly. And that's where our greatest errors can be made, by the way, in our system 1 brain. We need to put in contingencies in place in our day-to-day working so we can lean into our system 2 brain, which is more slower, more steadier, more conscious, and we make more rational decisions, which can actually be more accurate in the decisions that we're making, and we often get things right. And just think about your pace and your day-to-day work and how often you're expected to make decisions that will lead you into sometimes relying on your gut too much without looking at the data or the evidence around you. And that's where we can unintentionally exclude people without thinking about what's going on around us. But when we slow down and steady our pace a bit more, especially when it's critical or crisis-led communications, we can see the errors and the gaps that we have in our communications and make the right choices. If you haven't read, like I said, Thinking Fast and Slow, then do check it out. So, what can you steal? So, I've shared with you what you need to stop doing, what you need to start doing, but what can you steal to help you understand this a bit better? So, in our book, Building a Culture of Inclusivity, we've created this DEI evolution scale. And what we found in our research is that many organizations kind of sit between these 6 steps in terms of their progression when it comes to inclusive cultures. You need to understand from a communications perspective where you are and where your appetite is from an organizational point of view to build more inclusion in the workplace. If you scan that QR code on screen, you can take the assessment and there's a number of questions for you to answer and it'll pop out the result in terms of where you are. And what I would advise you to do is also share that QR code or the URL link to other people in your organization to see if they align with where you think you are or where they believe they are. It's really interesting to see where leaders believe the organization is, where comms believe the organization is, and where HR and other teams believe the organization is, because we've found in our research that there's often a gap. So what the steps are, normally organizations who are in exist, this is where you're comfortable where you are and you don't think there's any need for change. You're not overly interested in building inclusive spaces or inclusive campaigns. Then some organizations who have a bit of an interest may move into interface, and this is where you dip your toes in. So you may share a post on your social media. So an example is like the rainbow flag, or when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, a lot of folks shared the black box on Instagram, but not really understanding why they were sharing it. Then you move into educate, which is educate is where you may read the books, you may attend sessions like this, you may get some training because you're quite curious about how you can be better in terms of building better inclusive cultures. Then once you've done that, you may shift into embrace, which is where you start understanding the business case of all of this. You might hire that DEI leader. You may start creating that specific DEI plan or an inclusive culture plan, and you've got some responsibility and accountability. Then you've got engage. This is where everyone realizes it's a group effort. You speak up more often and you get employees engaged and they understand the business case behind it. And then the other step is embed. And this is kind of one of the final steps. And this is just how you do things around here. It's not a standalone vertical on your strategy. It's actually horizontal and everything feeds out of your inclusive communications or inclusive culture foundations in your workplace. So often what we see in some organizations who are in embrace and engage, it's a DE&I is a vertical pillar that's standalone that someone somewhere is responsible for. Embed is when it's truly embedded in everything you do and it's not really a standalone subject. Like I said, do the quiz, the assessment. It'll take you about 60 seconds, no longer than that, and you'll get the results emailed to you or you'll see it on the screen as well. So just to recap, the principles of being inclusive: review your data and insight properly. Make sure you're looking at this information. That's why it exists. You can use tools like the AI tools around you, Copilot, Claude, whatever your preference, and ask it to summarize for you, but make sure you're doing the due diligence when you're doing that, and make sure you're asking the right prompts so you're not allowing bias to infiltrate those results. What is that information telling you and how can you make a story around that? Track what's working and what isn't as well. Where is that return on investment? Not only in monetary, by the way, but also in time, in resources, the outcomes. Put proper systems in place that are fair and transparent. We often look at the tool, not the system. Look at the process and the system and make sure that you are as inclusive as you can be. Do a checklist if you need to do a checklist. Make sure you've got guardrails and guidelines to help other people be more inclusive as well. And remember what I said earlier, it can't be diversity Olympics. You can't pit minority groups against each other. You can't do everything for everyone. And you can't allow people to beg and make sure that they are being heard. You have to be as inclusive as you can and make sure that you've got a proper plan in place to help you do that. It's not just about what you say, as I said at the start of this, it's how you include people, in the planning and help them belong. And when you do that with genuine care, with genuine needs to build an inclusive campaign, an inclusive culture, whatever your remit is, you will start to see people be their best self. You'll start to see confidence grow. You'll start to see more innovation in the workplace, and you'll start to see people being able to be more fulfilled and understand their value better as well. If you're interested in finding out more, you can purchase our book, Building a Culture of Inclusivity. I know Ruth has got a giveaway for our book as well. But if you don't win that giveaway, then you can save 20% if you go directly through the Kogan page website and type in the code COMSRUBBLE. I hope you found this presentation interesting. If you have any questions at all about what I shared, I'm conscious it was a very pacey, fast presentation. A lot of information was shared with you. But DM me on LinkedIn. You can find me under Advita Patel. You can send me an email, advita@comsrebel.com. Or, of course, you can drop Ruth a note with any questions that you might have, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I will see you very soon.